newsmaker on No Spin tonight is Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament from the Congress Party and former Minister of State for External Affairs, in fact. Shashi Tharoor, great to have you as our first guest on this brand new show. And I'll begin by asking you about your position on India and Russia. In fact, you've taken a stand where you've said that you believe India shouldn't be seen to be on the wrong side of history, a position which your party seems to have distanced itself from today.
Yeah, I'm speaking for myself, Nidhi, and really let me begin by congratulating you on the new show. It's good to have you back on primetime television. As far as I'm concerned, I really am speaking on the basis of my own experience, my own international service, and my conviction that India has consistently and should consistently stand for certain principles in international relations that apply to all, in all circumstances. And these principles, the respect for sovereignty of states, the inviolability of borders, and the principle that governments should not use force to resolve their political disputes, all of these have been enshrined in documents going back to Nehru's Panchsheel and before. So it's not that I'm saying anything particularly new. It's just that our government appears to have taken a stand which, to my mind, puts us in a somewhat invidious position. We uphold these principles everywhere else. We don't want to uphold them when it involves Russia because of all the factors you so ably summarized. But tomorrow, if, say, the Chinese march across our border, violate our sovereignty, and try and use force to get what they want out of us, don't you think we'll want to have the same principles upheld by the rest of the world? No, it seems to me that this kind of inconsistency is not particularly welcome.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, but some of the arguments that some other foreign policy watchers have, sort of put forward is that, well, when China did transgress in Ladakh, a lot of these countries really did not speak up for India when they should have. Now, how would you respond to that argument that ultimately India just needs to look out for its own interests and that there is double speak, especially from Europe on China?
No, but on that particular incident you're referring to, which is what China did in Galwan in June of 2020, unfortunately our own Prime Minister declared that the Chinese had not encroached upon Indian territory. So it was going to be somewhat difficult to get foreign countries to say something that we were not prepared to say had happened in our own land. So that's why I think that's not a very good example. But if you take 1962, when the Chinese did march into our country, the world by and large stood by us and expressed a great deal of support for us on the basis of these self-same principles.
Do you think that India will have to nuance its position on Russia? Look, at the end of the day, if we are so dependent on the Russians for defense weapons, is it really practically possible for India to take a position against Russia?
No, I'm not suggesting that we just take a blunt position against Russia. I'm saying that we point out that Russia is regrettably in violation of these sacred principles, and that while we have a great deal of respect for, and indeed we support, legitimate Russian security concerns being respected by the states in the region, we don't agree with this way of pursuing those legitimate concerns. That's the sort of message that I believe we could have given. And having given that message, if necessary, we could have still abstained. But the fact is that message was not given. Our explanations, including our explanation of vote in the Council, were somewhat wishy-washy. On this question of whether we'll be forced to change our position, and no one can force a sovereign state like India to change its position, but there's no question that there is a great deal of disappointment in a number of Western capitals and in Ukraine itself. We've seen that awful video of the Ukrainian soldiers assaulting Indian students and saying, your country stood with the Russians, why should we look after you, why should we help you? Why should we get that particular reputation? We don't actually owe Russia anything. Every defense purchase we've made from Russia, we're paying for, and we're very often paying top dollar. So that it's also in Russia's interest to make that money off us, and it would be shooting themselves in the foot for them to try and punish us by depriving themselves of one of their most important military markets in the world. So I think that we should understand there's mutual benefit involved for Russia as well as us. And if we have a good friendship, which we do, we should be able to speak frankly to our friends, at the very least in private.
Shashi Tharoor, you've been part of the UN system for decades. Hasn't this entire incident in a way exposed the weaknesses of the UN and what it can really do. And we have a General Assembly that's meeting in a rare emergency session that has started in New York tonight. What are they going to do at the end of the day?
They'll pass a resolution with an overwhelming majority that disagrees with what the Russians are doing. But it won't have any effect in the sense that a Security Council resolution can have an effect. A Security Council resolution has a certain impact because it's the body entrusted with maintaining international peace and security. And in principle, some of the resolutions under Chapter 7 are supposed to be binding. Though obviously, any permanent member will not allow any resolution to pass against its interests. So it was a foregone conclusion that Russia would veto a negative resolution of the Security Council. In the General Assembly, the Russians have no veto. The resolution will demonstrate to the world how isolated Russia is. Apart from us, the Chinese and a couple of other countries, the Russians will find themselves alone because it's very difficult for the rest of the world to condone what is widely seen as a blatant act of aggression, whatever the justification may be. And the justifications being rolled out themselves are not being, frankly, respected very much around the world. I would say that that's all that's going to happen. It will be a piece of paper, it'll be a document that perhaps can be periodically waved in the faces of the Russians. But it will have no binding effect at all.
Can I get a quick comment from you on the evacuation efforts, the Indian students who are stranded there in Ukraine? General VK Singh says that if you're stuck on Mars, Modi ji will save you. What do you think?
I certainly hope that he does so. I was a bit dismayed to see the celebratory way in which fewer than 1,000 people who've come back were being greeted with much effusive praise for the government by its own ministers, when in fact we have 20,000 more who are in many cases in rather desperate conditions. Many have run out of food or water. Very few actually have any resources or money. Some are being badly treated at the border crossings they've reached. Some are in places where they can't even get to the border because they're in interior towns and there is no transportation available or the means to access that transportation for them. So there's some real problems that we need to address. I'm not sure that sending ministers is the answer. It shows a certain seriousness of intent, great. But if those ministers end up distracting the staff on the ground because they have to dance attendance on the bigwigs, it'll be a shame, because what's really needed is more junior people at the border crossings in all of these countries and all of these crossings to actually help resolve any misunderstandings.
That's actually a sentiment that a lot of students have echoed as well. I think many are very grateful and thankful that they've been able to get out. But those that are just looking for help just need to speak to an official on the ground to be able to get from point A to point B. Shashi Tharoor, great to talk to you. Thanks very much for joining us this evening.